I have a very candid bunch of speakers here. And Ms. Kidwai, if I may begin with you, how disappointed, how disturbed are you about the GST being stalled yet again?
Very disappointed. It looked like we were almost there. Negotiation, discussion, in fact, solutions found at the state level, a lot of hard work done. And we know there's no ideological divide on GST. All political parties, previous government supported it, this one supports it. So it's a case of just making the detail work. The fact that this has, again, slipped away by all counts is absolutely a shame. And the world is looking to us to see this happen because we've raised this whole consciousness of GST to such a high level that I've been at several foreign institutional investor events where this question on GST has come up. When? It's not even, is it going to come, but when is it going to come? That this is really not going to be going down well at all, whether it is a global story or indeed, which is even more important for our Indian investor and Indian industry.
That's an important point indeed, and I'm glad you're saying with such an emphasis that you were very disappointed, because I'm sure everybody here on this panel shares your sentiment. Mr. Birla, how disappointed are you, and do you at one level believe it is shameful how very bad politics is once again trumping supposedly good economics?
Well, I'm disappointed, but I think it's not a showstopper, because we are on the track, and there is a political process which has held it up. There doesn't seem to be anything other than the political process which is holding it up. So to that extent, I say it's not a showstopper. I am nobody to comment on the politics, just as I hope that politics will not comment on, will participate in business. But, you know, it's, again, in many ways, it's been 9 years in the make. And, you know, as James Clavell wrote in a story, yesterday life was impossible, today you want it to be easy. And that's a question. So I think industry is getting on, and even when GST comes, I don't think there's going to be a magic on day one when GST comes, because despite all good intentions, you know, whether it's the user understanding the regulations, the states understanding the regulations, and the IT backbone really holding up. So I think there will be teething trouble. So by the time we really get the full flow of GST going, is going to be about a year, year and a half after it's introduced. So I don't think we're looking at any magic happening in one day. So to that extent, I say I'm disappointed, but it's not a showstopper.
All right. You're disappointed, not a showstopper. Mr. Khorakiwala, let me bring this to you, and I think that's a point very well made by the two previous speakers. You know, it is not stopped because of flaws in the bill. It has stopped because, and there is no ideological difference. It has stopped perhaps because of political differences. How disturbing is that as a trend, that, you know, the principal opposition and the government have let a standoff, be very bitter, and the GST has been a casualty for this?
I must say that, like everybody else, we are all very disappointed. And I think what one has to recognize that the amount of differences which were there a few years back, which has been ironed out in recent weeks and the months. And somehow the political process has gone out of hand in last couple of weeks. And that is what you are seeing. But I think one of the things very nicely Mr. Das mentioned in our earlier discussion, that GST is not year to year, but it can come any time during the year. And I think that's a very positive news. And I'm sure there are a lot of other things government is doing, which is helping the economy. As Mr. Kant was mentioning, that the ease of doing business will significantly change, improve over the years. A lot of things are simplified. In the next 2 to 3 years, we will move from what 100 plus to 50 among the 50 top countries in doing its business. And I'm sure all this is going to help the economy. And GST was one of the very important aspects which would create a single market. It will reduce operative costs. And as rightly said, it will gradually help the economy to grow.
Ms. Suri, who would you blame for the lack of GST to go through in the winter session? The government that perhaps did not reach out enough when it should have in the past, or the opposition that has decided to play hardball on what is perhaps a game-changing reform in India?
Well, I mean, I think it's a bit of both. Well, both the parties, the ruling party as well as the opposition, have reason to be blamed for. But having said that, the ruling party has made every single effort, and they have reached out at every different level to be able to convince them. And besides, they really don't need that convincing, because this is something which has been in the pipeline. They were the architects of this GST themselves. So where is the reason for anyone to try and convince them? I think the writing is on the wall. This country needs a GST, and the quicker we get it delivered, the better it is. Political differences should be overridden on this one, and they have to come together and they have to make it happen. Yes, disappointed slightly, no doubt about that. However, I agree with Siddharth, this is not a showstopper.
Right, not a showstopper, but disappointed, but blames both sides as far as the GST delay is concerned. Mr. Neotia, are you as forgiving as some of your other colleagues here that both sides have to be blamed, or would you want to pin the blame on the opposition on this one? You know, you call yourselves the author of the GST, and when it comes to really biting the bullet on this, you want to shy away and let political differences override this one.
Well, clearly your questions are getting tougher as the panelists are. But no, the fact that we are all disappointed, I think, is something that we all accept. I don't think it's a very fair to say that we can pin the blame on one particular party or one particular situation. I think there is a whole process of politics in our country where you have two houses, you have different kinds of representation of different parties in the two houses, and there is a process of consensus building. I think what I feel very reassured by is that in spite of the fact that it has taken long years, almost all the details have been ironed out, and I think the GST today hopefully is a much better GST than perhaps it was a few years ago. So that's a good news, and I think as this debate has gone on, the finer points have got ironed out. Having said that, there are contentious issues in any democracy, and they will play themselves out, and to that extent we have to be patient. It's a cliched thing, but that's what it is.
Are economists as patient as members of Indian industry on the GST, or do you believe the merits of the GST are such that some amount of impatience, some amount of frustration should have seen this pass through, which is not going to happen now in the winter session?
Well, I hope it does. You know, it's still not done, as they say. There's few more days left. But you're right. There is deep disappointment. That's absolutely without a doubt. And it's not clear, in fact, to me or many of my colleagues, what exactly was the reason that it didn't pass through when it was almost on the verge of passing. So this is somewhat inexplicable, and just saying that the opposition parties have been a roadblock is not the full explanation. So I think, you know, it's not clear to me. Certainly there's no economic reason. Everything has been thrashed out. In fact, the more it got delayed, even up to now, the more the state of readiness, because remember the GST's success critically depends on the IT backend and the readiness state of preparedness in the IT systems. So actually every state, some states were already far ahead, other states are gearing up. So actually the state of readiness is getting even better and better. And that's why what Mr. Das said earlier is very critical. He said that it's a consumption tax, it's not an income tax. We can start any day. We just switch on the system, it will start. So now the only thing left is to have the bill passed in Parliament. Now
the only thing left is for Parliament to function, let important legislation go through. Ms. Kidwai, let me ask you a more conspiracy theory question without really putting you on the mat. Are the merits of the GST so big that the ruling party wants it to pass at all costs? And, you know, the correlated question is, because the merits are so big, the opposition doesn't want the ruling party to leverage that merit. Are the merits of GST overrated, over-exaggerated, or is this really the big game changer that has been talked about for 9 odd years now?
I do think it is the game changer. I cannot think of a single easy reform, because this easiness of this reform is just the flicking of a switch, as Ajit correctly points out, that can bring 1.5% by consensus into the economy, and in fact even talks of a 2% GDP growth in the economy. There's no single move at a time when India needs it, when we need jobs, when we need to get industry back on its feet. And to me, the politics of India cannot destroy what is right for India. We have to think like Indians and do what is right for us. And if this is something that we can rise above our differences and get our act together, when the world watches us and watches us fail and falter, it is going to be important. And I don't think it has anything to do with this government wanting it more than another government and seeing, therefore, the reason for it to be what should not happen. Because no matter which party should see it as being important for India, and the only thing I had sympathy for were there were some states that felt that they were going to be negatively impacted, and it was important for their issues to be tackled. So those are the serious discussions, but they have happened. What is now good for the country must go through.
I think that's the point. If things are good for the country and if things are good for the Indian economy, it should override all differences. Ms. Suri, but let me bring this point to you, and I think Mr. Birla alluded to it earlier, when he said that GST is not going to create magic on day one. It's going to be a lag effect, 1.5, 2 years before we get on that. As someone who's got their skin in the game, you know, you were a member of Indian industry, you heavily invested here in India. Is GST something that Indian industry is singularly awaiting for? Is this going to change the way you do business?
It most certainly will change the way we do business. See, India is a large country. It is 29 states, 7 union territories, 1.2 billion plus people. We have to have a single unifying tax. There's absolutely no two ways about it. And therefore, getting the GST legislated and implemented as soon as possible is really going to be beneficial. It will change the way we do business, because we, for example, ourselves, we're almost in every state. And for us to even move something from one place to another is a nightmare. Therefore, the way business will be done will be changed, and it should be done and implemented as soon as possible. But of course, I completely agree that it is not going to hit the ground running. There will be ironing out to be done. It may take a while. You're not good. Don't expect a perfect GST like a magic wand. It will take time. I mean, all developed economies have done the same. They all have taken time to perfect it, and that is exactly what is going to happen with India. Therefore, it is imperative that we should do it as quickly as possible. Only then will we be able to reap the benefit the way we are looking at it.
That's a very, very valid point. I think it kind of alludes to something that you said earlier, Mr. Birla, that, it's not going to be magic on day one. But let me ask you this question. It depends on which side of the Treasury bench you are on, or the speaker that you sit over. The opposition believes a flawed model cannot go through, and the government believes you've got to have a starter somewhere. You cannot not start in search of that elusive perfect GST. Is that a valid argument, you believe? Or would you want more consensus? Would you want, more debate? Would you want a more perfect GST? It may take another 2, 3, 4, whoever knows how many years.
No, I think you need to go into the details rather than the motherhood statement that it's flawed, because we need to come back to the specific flaws which the opposition believes that the bill has, which also, by the way, some of them were changes of minds after they had written the GST bill. One was the 1% additional tax in...
and there is broad consensus that should go through. The government has given in on that.
I think there is a concurrence on the intent that it's needed and it must happen.
That's right.
The 1% extra tax, which in any case we had also opposed because it's not conducive to manufacturing, which the government in any case has given a solution that we undertake and to make good all the losses. So that's a non-issue. The second was a constitutional cap. Now that I don't know the political reasons for doing that, but I think a constitutional cap on any kind of tax is probably completely out of place, because next we'll start having income tax, and next we'll start having the other kind of taxations in the constitution. That's not done. The executive has to have the flexibility. The third was the dispute resolution mechanism, where I heard Mr. Jaitley give the model that was okayed by Mr. Chidambaram, to which he completely agrees. So I think there should be no issue. And other than these three, I don't think anybody has found any flaws.
So, Mr. Khorakiwala, let me just boil down to the specifics that Mr. Birla has alluded to in any case. The two big bones of contention now seem to be because 1% being abolished, I think Arvind Subramanian has paved the way for it by his report, and I think that's a broad understanding it is going to be done. I think the issue is that should you increase the GST cap rate within the Constitutional Amendment Bill itself, and should you leave dispute resolution to authorities outside of the Council, or should you let the Council handle it? Let me ask you on point number one. Shouldn't the GST cap rate be a part of the bill? Because we could perhaps be living in the fear of going up to very intolerable levels of GST by certain states, and that's some kind of a guard that could be put in.
I think there is a merit and demerit of that idea. And the merit of idea of having a part of a constitutional amendment is that there is always a tendency of the government, federal and the state both, to go on increasing taxes at their convenience and not control effectively the expenditure of the government and try to work within their means. So from that context, some kind of a cap has that merit. Obviously, it is very difficult to change the cap because you have to go through the same process of changing it. But I think it may be a worthwhile exercise to follow because generally this is not done anywhere. That is correct. It's the government has a right. But this idea cannot be dismissed out of hand, actually.
That's a valid point indeed, and I think that's the sentiment that the Congress party seems to share. Dr. Ranade, if I may bring this to you, the dispute resolution bit, and I think Mr. Birla rightly said that Mr. Jaitley has been talking about this for a while, that you let dispute resolution be within the council, and if the council cannot resolve it, let it then decide which is going to be the authority to. I think Mr. Chidambaram, in an interview that he did with me sometime back, he said that no, the disputants cannot be a part of the resolution. How do you make this easy? Because that is another big bone of contention that seems to be, at least the on-record reasons why the GST is being delayed.
Yeah, you see, Supriya, I'm not a legal expert or a constitutional expert, but this is again a matter which is, I think there was some kind of a consensus. It is a right principle that the guys who are in dispute, first of all, let's not always assume there will be a dispute. You know, there will be exceptional cases. So this will be hopefully in 1% or 5% of the cases. So the whole thing should not be hostage to that. Secondly, the dispute resolution is part of any agreement or anything that you sign. But you don't want, in this case, I guess you don't want the judicial presence. You want the council itself to mutually decide. So it's a question of division of bargaining strength. So I thought that both Mr. Chidambaram and Mr. Jaitley had reached some kind of an agreement on this. And this is a very small, I think this is a solvable problem. I don't think this is a showstopper.
I wish our legislators would be as optimistic as some of you here are, that these are solvable problems. But Mr. Neotia, let's just take this away from the GST for 1 minute and talk about how this reform is something that not just India Inc. is obsessed with, but the world seems to be watching. I mean, every foreign investor or institutional investor who's been on our channel in the last 1 odd year has said GST, GST and the GST. And yet the GST is not going to be a reality in the winter session. So my question is, will this send out a message that reforms in India are derailed? Reforms in India have been stalled. Reforms in India have hit a speed bump.
Well, I hope it doesn't send that signal. That's the way I'd like to look at it. It probably there will be some hiccups, I'm sure, because people have expected this to happen this time, and certainly there's been a lot of emotional equity put into that, so the disappointment is clearly there. The way I think the world looks at it is the GST will help in increasing transparency and help in unifying the whole country as one market instead of having these silos of taxation which are very different in each state. So I think we all know the merits of this whole thing. So clearly without it there is some disadvantage. But having said that, and I don't think we are assuming that this GST has now gone for good. It's going to happen. It's probably a few months later than we had anticipated. So I think I'd leave it with some level of optimism rather than to feel very despondent and pessimistic.
Ms. Kidwai, I know you're not as optimistic about this not sending out the negative signal, because I remember, I heard you say it will. You certainly think that this is going to send out a signal that the reform drive is derailed.
I think it does. I think it will absolutely send out a negative signal at a time when we least need it. And it doesn't reflect well on the country. It doesn't reflect on the way our democracy runs. It doesn't reflect well on the opposition parties. It doesn't reflect well on the government. So we all lose. And to me, it is something that we as Indians have to resolve, and resolve quickly. I have very little patience in my book for a GST that continues limping along with these, quite honestly now, debates, which frankly, we're wasting everyone's time even on this panel right now. We all know the answer is we have to do it.
I think that's perhaps putting it as frankly as you can, that we just have to do it and we've got to go ahead with it, and there is no other word in the book than saying we must have a GST. As we close this, I'm going to take a quick closing comment from each one of you, and I think I asked Ms. Suri this, so I'm going to spare her the onslaught right now, and I'm going to begin with Dr. Ranade from right there. Who do you blame for the GST not going in the winter session? An arrogant government, as the opposition would want it to be called, or a very obstructionist opposition, as the government would want it to be termed?
See, Supriya, that doesn't help us to find out, but I think we are all collectively responsible. Maybe, even the non-government players should have been putting pressure on both the parties to say, come to a consensus, come to an agreement. This is in national interest. This is not worth playing a political football. So I think we are all collectively responsible.
Mr. Birla, you agree that not enough pressure was put on the system, on the political class for the GST to go through?
I don't. I think we are beyond pressures over here, but really speaking, we are playing out what Lee Kuan used to call noisy democracy, and it's just a noisy democracy, and that's the way we work. So I really can't pin a blame.
So it's a noisy democracy where the elected house with an absolute majority does pass the bill. The unelected house, the Rajya Sabha, does not. But the framers of the constitution wanted that system to be.
The fundamental is it's not a money bill, otherwise the Lok Sabha would
That's
have passed
right,
it.
exactly.
And
exactly.
This is a constitutional amendment which has to be seen, which results into a money bill. Okay?
And we would want our reforms to be passed by political consensus and not by obstruction.
Exactly.
Mr. Neotia?
Well, I'll ditto what Siddharth Birla has said, because I think that's really what it is. We are going to have to live with this. The constitution makers had thought it wise to have this plurality in our system, to have these two houses and to give those constitutional powers in that sense, perhaps for good reason, and it's playing itself out. We are seeing how it works, and I think we will navigate it as a country. I feel very confident that we will navigate it and get the GST sooner.
Ms. Kidwai, self-goal by the opposition or a wake-up call for the government?
Well, I think the blame lies squarely in all courts. When an agreement isn't reached, it takes two hands to clap. So there's no doubt that there have been mishaps along the way, and it's culminated in a non-result. So everyone has to squarely take the blame.
Mr. Khorakiwala, you want to comment on that? You want to blame everyone, or do you want to blame the opposition more versus the government?
Very tough call, because I think when you talk of democracy, one has to accept that it will take time. You have to build a consensus. But one must admit that whatever happened in the last 6 months, which we say are obstructionist, but also helped the quality of the legislation. And what we are seeing, GST is better from an industry's point of view than what we had with 1% manufacturing tax. So there, if you look at that benefit versus we had 6 months back without that benefit, I think waiting for a few more months, hopefully, is worth it.
All right, lastly, as I close this, and I close the session with you, Ms. Suri, then, so probability of GST April 1, 2016 is next to nil. October 1, 2016, does that look probable?
I think we should just stop putting dates on this now. It will happen when it will happen. And I think we should stop that, because that speculation itself is very negative. So we have to go along. It has to happen. It will happen. Let's just stop putting any dates on it.
So let's just stop putting any dates on it, because if the GST had to happen, it would have happened. But a very frustrated and a very disappointed India Inc. as far as the GST is concerned, not blaming either sides, squarely putting the blame on both sides of the Treasury benches and some part of it on themselves as well. It's been a pleasure doing this session with each one of you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.